Hello everyone. So today we're going to learn the basics about how to write an essay. Until now, we have not really written an essay. We have only written short answer essays, like 1 or 2 paragraphs. And so you're not going to follow this structure for those kind of assignments. You're going to follow this structure for larger assignments that I will give you in the future, but I still want you to understand this for the correction that you will do of the shorter assignments that we have done in the past. So you will use this specifically. You will use not the introduction, but the body itself. So please correct your assignments that you have done so far according to the structure of the body that we will go over, okay? So first things off, I will explain the introduction, although this is the last thing that you should ever write in your essays. The reason for that is because normally as you do your research, you will change your ideas and you will change the order of your ideas, and you will probably most likely change your thesis as well. So it's important that you always leave the introduction for last. So you should always begin your paper writing by doing a significant amount of research, meaning you should spend a couple hours just reading a lot on the subject. Then try to do an outline of your main arguments, and then begin to develop your arguments by using examples. So let's just go to the body here. The first thing that you should do is an outline for your body. So you should first write like the thesis of your paragraph. Each paragraph should be governed by a thesis, and then you can include 1 or 2 arguments. One is enough. Each paragraph should have 1 argument, and then this argument will be explained or illustrated in 1 example. And lastly, you will restate your thesis, your paragraph thesis. You will summarize your arguments, or you will make a small transition to your next paragraph. So it depends here, whatever suits you best, depending on the subject, depending on what you're doing with this particular paragraph. You can choose between these 3. However, every single paragraph must follow this structure, and the reason for that is that this will give structure to your whole paper, and it'll flow like a waterfall. All your arguments need to have a logical sequence, and this is why you need to really do an outline before you begin writing, okay? Writing and adding the meat to your paper is the last thing you should do. You should always just write an outline like this. You can use bullet points, and then you unite phrase after phrase with transitional phrases that I will explain in just a minute, okay? Now, your structure itself, the logical sequence of your paragraphs, should follow one of two different kinds of structures. The first kind of structure is a sequential structure, meaning that you should use this whenever your whole paper follows 1 logic, and and every single argument adds to the same thesis or the same idea. So you should start your paragraphs with first, then your next paragraph with second, lastly third, or to conclude, in sum, etc. If you choose, however, the dialectic structure, which I recommend, then this is because you have realized that some of your arguments kind of feed into 1 idea, but some other arguments feed into another opposing idea. And this is really good for the academic world because it allows you to give nuanced answers. Sometimes, especially in the humanities, you don't have answers that are black and white. This is not math, this is not science. you're dealing with the human world, you're dealing with people, and so usually things are a little bit more gray because you're dealing with philosophy and ideas. So in the humanities, I really recommend that you use this dialectic method, meaning, we will study this later, but basically what this means is that you have a thesis, then you have an antithesis, or the opposing idea of that first thesis, and then you synthesize the two by creating like a conclusion that includes both. So your conclusion should be a yes, but ultimately no, or a no, but ultimately yes. Okay, so now that we have your body, okay, now just one last thing. I have placed a chart with very good transition words that you should use for every single one of our essays. I will specifically look for these, okay? So I will tell you, I don't know, maybe a number of words from this chart that you need to use for your essays. This is a really good chart. You should always use it even after school. It's very helpful. Okay, so now let's just move on to the conclusion. I know I said I would explain the introduction first, but I changed my mind. Okay, now we will... Okay, so in the conclusion, your conclusion consists of, let's say, two main parts. The first part, in which you synthesize your arguments, or you restate your thesis. And so if you chose the sequential structure, you simply need to list your arguments one by one to summarize them, right? And then just to give your answer. Now, if you chose the dialectic structure, then your conclusion will be nuanced. Either a yes, but a no, or a no, but ultimately yes, like I just mentioned, okay? Now let's go really quickly to the introduction. In the introduction, as I mentioned, this should be the last section that you write ever, always. And your introduction is composed of 7 main parts. Not every single one of your essays will have all 7 parts. It depends, but I highly recommend that you try to include all 7 parts as much as possible. So the first part is the first sentence. This should be an eye-catching sentence to begin your essay, and it must be a general statement to introduce your subject. So I have given an example. Here I have: Leonardo's theology and religious beliefs have long been a subject of conjecture for many scholars. You know, it's like a global sentence that will hook your reader and be like, wow, you know, Leonardo's theology has been debated for centuries, for example. That's a good essay starter. Then, in order to bring it from the general to the more specific topic you will be discussing, you need to write 1 or 2 sentences to make a transition. And I have given this example. So, over the centuries, some have claimed that he was an absent-minded Roman Catholic, others have claimed that he was an agnostic or an atheist, and others have even argued that he was a precursor of the Protestant Reformation. Now, a lot of you included this phrase in your essays, and I know where that came from, but none of you cited it. Now, I don't know if you have learned how to cite before, but if you haven't, that's okay. We will learn how to cite in this class. It's very, very important, so I will go into that a little bit later, but yeah, this phrase needs to be cited, okay? Now, the third part of our introduction will be to explain the importance of the subject. This is important because your reader needs to know why he must read your paper. So he or she will be interested in knowing the reason why he or she should spend time here. So now I have provided this example. The widespread interest in learning about Leonardo's religious beliefs seems to stem from the fact that he's widely considered to be, I have a typo here, to be one of the one of the smartest men that ever lived, and thus people believe he might have had extraordinary insight about the existence of God. Okay, now your fourth item will be you will introduce the question that you were asked by your teacher or the question that you yourself formulated if you were asked to do that. So for example, I have written here, in light of the above, this essay will seek to address the question of Leonardo's religion and evaluate whether there was an evolution in his beliefs during his lifetime. And number 5, we have the methodology. Now this is really important that you have a good methodology that is reliable. Otherwise, your paper loses credibility. So it's really important that you have good sources and you don't just cite, a random person that just says whatever comes to his mind. It's important that you have good sources. So I have given an example here. This essay will draw from the earliest and most reliable sources on Leonardo's life, namely the writings of Giorgio Vasari, the renowned Renaissance historian who is credited with being the first to write extensively on Leonardo's life and who published his findings a mere 30 years after Leonardo's death. Now, just to give you an example, Giorgio Vasari is a reliable source because he was a historian and he lived shortly after Leonardo's life. So although today it may seem to you that 30 years is a long time, back then usually works were written, centuries after the person about whom they're written lived. So 30 years in the academic world and in history is not a very long time, and this is a good indicator that you have a good source. Now, after you have explained your methodology, you should state your thesis or what you believe, the conclusion that you have reached. Now, this is why the introduction should be written at the end. So I say here, I will argue that though for most of his life Leonardo was not a religious man, his last statements before death suggest that he underwent an important transformation in his worldview during the last months he spent bedridden in the Clos Lucé in Amboise, France. And lastly, but very importantly, you need to include a transitional phrase to explain the structure of your paper so that your reader does not get lost, okay? I have written here, the following analysis will be divided into 3 sections. In the first section, I will revisit Leonardo's early life and upbringing and suggest the ways in which it influenced the development of his personal beliefs. In the second section, I will examine the context of 15th century Florence and analyze how the artistic and political milieu of the time had an impact on his personal beliefs. As reflected on his famous I might rephrase this. But then, lastly, I will revisit Leonardo's last statements before death and suggest how this constitutes evidence of a shift from his previously held convictions. Okay, so I have provided some examples for your introduction. I hope that is helpful. We have already spoken about the body and the different structures that you can follow. You need to choose one of these two. But your paragraphs, ultimately, each one of them should follow this particular structure, like the one that I have just highlighted. Okay, so this is not optional. These are optional. So you choose either one or the other. And we have already spoken about the conclusion. Now I will talk about the vocabulary, because as I was correcting your assignments, I saw a lot of things that are not very professional and not very academic. So this is just a reminder that you cannot write in the same way that you speak. So always avoid words such as good or bad, words such as stuff, really, thing. Please look up synonyms of these words, which are too plain. And I have provided some examples that replace, for example, the word good can be replaced with remarkable or fine or outstanding. You should also avoid at all costs formulas such as "for starters," because this is only in oral English that you use this phrase, or "honestly, I think that." This is not professional at all. And then, or "basically, he thought that." This word basically kind of takes away all the elegance from your phrases. Instead, you should write more elaborate formulas such as "concerning the da 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 da," or "regarding Leonardo's beliefs da 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 da, I believe," or "it is not unreasonable to think." I like this one because it's a more impersonal phrase, and you should, as much as possible, try to avoid speaking in the first person. This is especially important for university, but we will start practicing now. So phrases such as "can be observed" or "scholars believe that" sort of add a certain air of fact to your essays, and it's no longer your opinion, but it's something that a lot of people believe, or even better, scholars believe. Okay, now make sure that that's actually true. You don't just want to mention that, you want to make sure that that's actually true. Never repeat the same phrasing more than once. Keep the same verb tenses throughout your essay. This is really important, especially for history. You should write your essays in the past, like your verbs should be in the past, because the people we're dealing with already died. And lastly, unless explicitly asked, don't give examples from your personal life. We're going to learn how to write more professional essays, and this is a very important aspect, okay? This should all be about the subject matter and not necessarily your personal life, unless you're explicitly asked to bring examples. Lastly, I have added some guidelines about the presentations that for the presentation of all your assignments. I'm not going to go into detail right now, but you can access this document. I will upload it to Drive, so you will always have it there. Lastly, a very important topic is the subject of citations. I will go over this in class as much as necessary, just because this is such a big topic and there's so many subjects to discuss here. But I just want to mention that you always from now on need to cite where you get your information from. If you don't, it has very serious consequences, because essentially what you're doing is you're claiming that everything you wrote is actually yours or your ideas, when in reality you're stealing somebody else's work. Okay, so this is the equivalent of stealing in the academic world, and you could be in university for sure. You will be expelled from university, and usually sometimes universities blacklist you. Like once a professor catches you plagiarizing, right? This is the term, plagiarizing, or stealing somebody else's work or ideas. They put you on this list, and universities have access to this list of people that have copied ideas without attributing the work. So this is a very serious issue, okay? And so every time that you copy more than 5 consecutive words that you did not write, you must put the entire phrase inside quotation marks. And then beside the quotation mark, you should add a footnote with your source and include it afterwards in your bibliography. So this is a footnote. You simply add it by going to references, and then you click here on footnote. And then at the end of your paper, you will have something like this. You will write here the author who wrote this. You will write the source, meaning the work of literature or whatever, where he wrote that, the section, and lastly the year. Now this is just an estimated example. It'll change depending on your source, but I will explain this more in class, or I will record another video, because this is a very long subject. And okay, so that is if you copy more than 5 consecutive words that you didn't write. This is good, but it is always preferable if you, instead of copying the exact words, you rephrase them or you paraphrase them. This is better because it allows you to expand your vocabulary, as well as, in other words, you should only copy the exact words if you feel that there's no possible way in which you could phrase that better than what the other person wrote, okay? So always try to paraphrase another person's ideas using your own words. However, even when you do that, you always need to cite your source. Always. So even if you paraphrase, don't forget to cite the source in the same way as you did above, except that there's no need to add the phrase inside quotation marks, because now it's with your own vocabulary that you wrote it, but you still need to add a footnote and the bibliography. Again, I will speak about the bibliography in another video. And okay, I think I've already explained this. And lastly, for this class, we will be using the Chicago citation style, which is also known as Turabian. And I am providing a link that you can consult here, where you can get all the details about how to write footnotes. They're giving you examples. If it's a book, then your footnotes should be like this. Then this is like the first footnote that you write. Later, if you cite the same work again, then you can write a shortened version. And lastly, in the last page of your work, this is the way that the bibliography should look like. Now notice the differences between the footnote and the bibliography. While in the footnote you have the first name of the author followed by their second name, in the bibliography you have the last name followed by a comma followed by the first name. This is in order to organize your sources according to alphabetical order. So this is why the last name is used first. Then notice how in your footnotes we use commas to separate the information. You have a comma here, you have a comma here, while in your bibliography we use periods. So first the name of the author, the last name, the name, and then a period, then the name of the work, another period, then the city in which it was published, the publication house, and lastly the year. In your notes, the city and the publication house and the year will all be inside parentheses, followed by the page in which you found the quote. In your bibliography is not, you don't include the page, but you do include it in your footnotes, okay? So these are some of the differences, but you will go over them in your own time. Just make sure that you're really good observers and you notice and you compare these three. We will be using all of them because this is what you are required for university for all your papers, okay? So this will be practice time. Now this is if you quote a book. If you quote a chapter or part of an edited book, then there's another way to quote things. If you quote from, these are ebooks, thesis or dissertations, journal articles, there's websites at some point here, magazines, book reviews, website content. I believe that this will be the one that we will use the most, simply because it's the easiest kind of information to access, and we will not be dealing with books so much in high school as much as in university. You will have to read whole books in university and then you will cite from there, but in high school we will mainly deal with website content. So follow the guidelines as to how you should cite websites, okay? It's all explained here, very detailed. And okay, so those are the main citation guidelines that we will use in this class. I know that a lot of you used sources that are not very recommended, like Wikipedia. That's fine. Sometimes I also use Wikipedia, and it's just like I say Wikipedia is like the first source that you should consult, because it has a lot of information in it, but you should never ever cite Wikipedia. So for example, for your essays, we cited this one phrase that Leonardo had offended God. I don't know why they wrote this word here, but offended God and men by failing to practice his art as he should have done, right? And they add here a footnote. Now, I think just to make your life easier, I would just simply copy this footnote like this and include it, let's say it goes here, and include it as your footnote like that, right? Now, this footnote is likely not in Chicago style. It may be in other styles such as APA or MLA. You will hear about these later. So what you do is you type this information in a tool known as like citation machine. So let me just look it up. Citation machine. So there's tools online that help you create your citations so that you don't have to do it by hand. This is really helpful. Unfortunately, it's not loading. Okay. So here you click on create citations and you say, well, this is from a website, and then usually it just lets you, I don't know, it lets you include like the link of the website. Let's say we're citing Wikipedia, which you should never do, but just for the sake of an example. So you search for it, and then you say cite. It gives you like this information that they identified, and then you go continue, and then you can change the information. So for example, here you have the article title, correct? Then well, let's say this is not Wikipedia, right? So you have an author of the work, either the person who wrote the article, or whoever. So you write the first name, you write the last name, you include the URL, you include all of this information, the date that you access the information, the date that it was published. Some websites include this, some don't. And then you click on complete citation. Okay, so let's say, and here, this is the most important. So here you can change the style of the citation, right? So they give you multiple options, and you will choose Chicago style, which is the one that we will use for this class, and the one that is most used in the humanities, in history and the social sciences, etc. So you simply, I guess, you copy the citation, and then you insert it in your paper in the footnote. So let's remove this for a second, and let's add our new citation. And this is the way that it goes. Okay, so again, I will explain this in further detail in other videos or in class, I will decide. But hopefully this is a good introduction to citation styles and to how to write an essay. Everybody did a wonderful job on the papers. However, I do want you to start correcting according to what I have just explained, and then whatever you haven't corrected, I will continue to comment on your papers. But for now, please begin to correct according to the guidelines that I have just explained. Have a good afternoon, everyone, and see you tomorrow.